Hello, you're listening to 179th special episode of Web Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Vadim Makeev from HTML Academy, and we're in Mozilla's Berlin office together with Chris Mills from MDN. Hello, Chris, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, hey, Vadim. Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. I am the content lead and writers team manager for MDN.
All right. For our listeners who probably don't know, we used to work together for a while in Opera.
Yes, that is very true. It was cool to bump into you again at JSConf EU, after all that time not seeing you after working together at Opera. It was a nice time. We did all of the dev relations work together to try and improve people's understanding of web standards and improve web compatibility and such things. I really enjoy those times. So.
Yeah, good days. Anyway, back to our questions. I prepared some for you. Let's start with the most important one. Is it FF or FX? Like, people try to write down a Firefox name shorter, and I heard about some opinions about this. What's your take on this?
Ah, yes. Well, this is the most important question that the internet faces right now. It's just like GIF and GIF, or it's like smooth or crunchy peanut butter, or Nutella or Nougatti was the particular fight that there was all the time in the Opera Oslo office, I seem to remember. So I tend to say FX. A lot of people I've seen writing down tend to put FF. I've even seen people put FFox, or I would just say stick to FX. Even though it's less intuitive, it's kind of like the hipster way to write Firefox in a short way.
Yeah, it sounds cooler, I think, than FF. Okay, two less important questions. How Mozilla works? I know it's a vague question, but for most of our listeners, I guess, like most of them are front-end developers. Firefox is a browser. That's one thing. It used to be Netscape many years ago. Like Firefox is based on Netscape, and that's it. It's browser. It's free for everyone, and you have great DevTools. But what else? What else do you have in Mozilla Corporation Foundation? It's complicated.
It is quite complicated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Mozilla started off as the Mozilla Foundation, so it was a not-for-profit. But then, of course, the US government started going, well, hold on a minute, you seem to be making a whole bunch of profit out of this stuff. This is quite interesting. You have a lot of money coming in through default search providers and other such means. So we split the company off into two halves, the corporation and the foundation. So the corporation is where most of the actual kind of product development occurs, such as Firefox and MDN. I'm part of the corporation, and Firefox on Android, Firefox on iOS, and some of the other kind of interesting versions of Firefox we have coming out, like Firefox Focus, which is our very privacy-oriented browser, privacy and security-oriented, and the DevTools get developed over in the corporation as well. The foundation is more kind of leaning towards things such as activism and education and policy. So that's where that sort of stuff tends to happen.
So you're making money, most of your money on defaults in a browser, like Opera used to do, maybe still doing these days.
It's how many browsers that don't have things like giant ad networks to leech off make their money. So in the same way as it was back at Opera, we make most of our money through Google default search revenue. So for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's just the idea of, your default search engine will make loads of money for each search. So therefore, search engines will pay vast sums of money to have them as the default search engine in browsers, because let's face it, many people will not even know that there's different search engine options. We are trying to diversify revenue streams a little bit. So we have in the past toyed with things like using different search engines that are more kind of locale aware, so options such as, Yandex in Russia or Baidu in China, for example.
So why Mozilla even exists? There used to be a Netscape code base that was converted into Firebird and then Firefox browser. Yeah, it was a nice thing to do, to have some independent browser back in the day. So how many years ago Firefox as a browser won browser war? Now it's facing another war with different browsers, so it still exists. And why would we need a browser like Firefox these days? Maybe we should just stick to Safari, Chrome, and what other independent browser we have.
Which is not really any, to be perfectly honest. After Microsoft jumped ship over to Chromium as well, I'm not too bitter about that. But I think probably our role is more important than ever now. The fact that we have got a gradually dwindling number of independent implementations of the web. It means that we're pretty much the only alternative. If you can count WebKit and Chromium as being roughly the same, but they have diverged significantly.
Yeah, it's been 6 years since they forked Chromium from WebKit. So those are two different browsers, though they still use WebKit prefix for some things, but different JavaScript engines, different approach to implementing web platform features. So yeah.
But, I think that our role is more important than ever now because, you need multiple implementations of the web to drive competition and drive innovation and drive new features. Otherwise, there's a danger that the web will just stagnate. Or even worse, if people end up, say in a sort of dystopian future in a few years' time, literally the only engine people are using is Chromium, there would be kind of less of a reason to actually bother even with web standards anymore. And it would just be, one company calling the shots. So I think that could be quite a dangerous future indeed. In terms of what the web was supposed to be in the first place, if I can, quoting out of our manifesto, the classic line that I always think of in terms of why I work for Mozilla is that the internet is a global public resource that must remain open and accessible to all. And I think that can only be achieved if we continue to innovate with web standards that solve the problems that users have and that developers have on the web, but also stop carefully to think about major issues such as accessibility, such as the fact that not everybody is on a really, really fast Wi-Fi network, for example. All of these issues around responsive web design, I think that's still a very big deal now. And then particularly before that, I mentioned that I was managing the MDN writers team. This is another aspect of Mozilla, is education is a very big thing. Right. I love the fact that the web is built on open source and open standards, so pretty much anybody within reason can actually get themselves on the web and create a site and express themselves. But I want to try and make that as easy as possible because I believe it's kind of like a right that everybody should have. Yeah,
that's true. Okay, you're also doing some web standards work in Mozilla. If you compare, for example, Google Chrome's market share to Firefox market share, it seems like, Google gets to decide every aspect of web platform, but it's not. You still have a strong voice in web standards community. You still have a lot of editors and people interested in developing standards. So you can say, no, we're not going to do this way. So you still have an opinion, and they respect you. That's really a nice thing to see.
No, absolutely. I think this is an interesting part of the conversation because it kind of starts to move around the other way. I'm not going to sit here and moan about Google, the company, because there's no point and it wouldn't achieve anything. But if you look at some of the people involved, for example, in the Chrome DevRel team, there's some amazing people that care about web standards in just the same kind of way that we do.
It's a huge mistake to talk only about the company.
Absolutely.
It's more important to focus on actual people, what they do, because developers on one service inside of a service inside of Google, they usually have different opinions. They often oppose each other, not in the public, but you can clearly see that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you're right. We should focus on people and on the community that we have around web technologies. That was very plain to see when we were just hanging out at JSConf EU together, which was amazing to see the sort of the feeling of kind of kindred spirits and a good tribe of people that just want to do the right thing.
I was also surprised to see, not surprised, but I was really happy to see that they announced Puppeteer for Firefox on Google I/O. I attended recently. So they took the big part of their talk to explain that, it's not Chromium only. So we recently helped guys from the Mozilla to launch their Puppeteer API for Firefox. So you can use not only browser engine, but those two. Maybe one day it will be available for Safari as well, but who knows? Yeah, Puppeteer for Firefox is a thing. So you worked on this together. That's a really nice thing.
That is good to see being publicly announced. But in lots of other areas in terms of the standards process, we do have a major voice in terms of over at WhatWG, some of the key spec editors over there are Mozilla people, for core technologies such as DOM APIs. We're also a major player in some of the upcoming sort of exciting innovations that are coming to the web, like the WebAssembly project, which is really, really interesting. I kind of would encourage everybody to figure out how they can transpile lower level code across to create modules that will run fast on the web. I think that's really going to be a huge game changer. I think it already is a huge game changer. So lots of areas in which we contribute.
When was this quantum project launched? A couple of years ago, or like a year and a half, maybe?
I can find out, actually. I'm just very quietly tapping on my laptop right here. So Firefox 57 was the first version to feature Quantum, and it was November 2017. So
all right.
About a year and a half, maybe.
So I started noticing that a lot of developers are switching to Firefox, starting from this point. Maybe because you started some campaign among developers, start promoting DevTools in Firefox that are superior in many ways than Chrome ones, or it was because of speed, or because developers were looking for alternatives. But I tried Firefox myself when you launched this Quantum project in Firefox 57, and I tried to use it for a month, and then I went back to Chrome, and then I tried again, and since then I'm using Firefox nightly as my main browser. Logo is cool, first of all. I mean, the colors are just beautiful. I also feel like I'm using, I'm supporting in a way alternative browser engine, and also experience is very, very good. It's much more flexible in terms of interface and everything. Do you have an idea why this happened?
I suppose there's two main streams we could talk about here. So the first stream to talk about was a lot of our platform engineering team just kind of looked and went, if we're really going to compete effectively in this space, we need to sort of take a step back and really focus on massively improving the core offering of functionality coming out of Firefox, rendering the web incredibly quickly, incredibly smoothly. So a bunch of our principal engineers kind of just went back and redesigned a lot of parts of it from the ground up, just to really, really show that we can compete effectively with Chrome, which was, before that, Chrome was really kind of killing us in the performance area. So we closed the gap there, so that was really great. And there's also more coming as well. We keep implementing new parts. We've just released, or maybe in the next version or so, we will release our web render, new really fast painting of pages to significantly reduce jank and have pages rendering much more snappily. So the second stream I was going to talk about here in regards to the DevTools, Google Chrome's DevTools have always been very strong in terms of JavaScript debugging. So there was kind of a conscious decision to go after the areas in which they weren't looking at and they weren't as strong in. And that's paid great dividends, because a lot of the CSS design tools that we have now are world-class and are really, really kind of making some of the Chrome DevTools folks run scared, I would say. An example was I was also at CSS.conf, as I believe you were in the last few days in Berlin. And I couldn't fail to have a smile on my face about the fact that most of the talks in the morning all mentioned awesome features of the Firefox.
Like many speakers, even on JSConf, some speakers mentioned by the way, Firefox DevTools are awesome, like over and over again. So it might be a trend among developers.
No, it's really good to see. We've got things like the Grid Inspector, which is having additional features added to support the new subgrid offerings. Yeah. The new Flexbox Inspector is looking really good. We have all these things coming, so it's an exciting time, and still even that well known. So we'll be talking about this for some time.
I was really disappointed, to be honest, at Google I/O, because I haven't seen any talk mentioning CSS, like advancement in CSS or in DevTools for CSS, like JavaScript only, APIs, hardware, this and that, everything related to the web, but no CSS. Mozilla is doing the right thing here, like trying to fill this gap. Something's clearly not right in Google department. Like they're focusing on JavaScript only. They're missing some parts.
Perhaps. Yeah, I mean, it does surprise me that they focus so much on things other than CSS, because it's still such a major part of the web. I mean, both you and myself are both big CSS fans, so I suppose we notice it maybe more than some people do. But yeah, and it's not as if CSS spec development has stagnated or anything. There's a whole bunch of new things coming along.
I also start noticing independent companies like Igalia, Bloomberg, Akamai, and other smaller or bigger companies also taking part in web platform development. They taking part in developing specs. One of the examples, I saw Manuel Rega's talk on CSS containment at CSS.conf, I believe. And he explained it really interesting details about CSS containment, how it's going to change the way we isolate properties inside of a block. And yeah, it was something new developed, not inside of browser company, not inside of like Microsoft, Apple, or he's working for an agency. And I wonder what's their interest in this, and why do you think they're doing this?
I suppose there's a variety of reasons, isn't there? I mean, there's definitely some companies as opposed to browser vendors that come along and help to implement very specific things that are useful to their business. Like the classic example I always think of is Netflix helping to implement EME and all of those kind of technologies which are maligned in certain circles, but it's necessary to have that kind of stuff available on the web if you're going to have commercial media delivery platforms
that's true.
taking part.
But Bloomberg or like Igalia developing like grids, why would they need it?
No, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? I don't know if I've particularly got easy answers on that one. I suspect that it's probably a combination of, seems useful in some ways to their business, but also it's got partly, certain companies may have champions that just want to show that this company has a commitment to the web and wants to contribute to its future viability.
Or if this company is big enough or they have enough money and resources, they could think like, we're gonna, instead of creating our own framework to do this on top of web platform, maybe we can integrate this in browsers and use this technology in a much more efficient way and also contribute to web platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think that whatever the reasons, it's actually quite encouraging seeing more non-browser vendor companies contributing, just because it's kind of good to shake it up and have more diverse opinions coming to the table to talk about how these technologies should be specified. But also, I get the feeling that, having companies with real users, sort of real end users coming in, gives kind of a better kind of real world test for the technologies. Is this a solution in search of a problem, or is it actually a real technology that's got a real user need? For certain end users really need this to happen to be able to use their favorite products. You get the feeling that sometimes, and I'm not saying this is always the case, but sometimes you'll get the browser vendor and they'll be like, right, we've specified this thing that we've got a good feeling about that is probably needed. But then some of the engineers are like, well, I'm basically just implementing this algorithm that the spec defines, possibly without having a complete understanding of the actual user need or developer need at the end of it. So I think that's only got to be a good thing, and having a greater understanding
that's true.
of such issues.
Okay, back to MDN. What you're doing there?
What are we doing there? Well, our mission is basically to give web developers the information they need to be able to do their job. But we've kind of expanded that a bit over the years. One thing that I noticed is that we had quite a lot of feedback where we would have students or hobbyists or beginners saying, I've had MDN recommended to me as the place to go to learn JavaScript or to learn CSS, but actually it's a bit too complicated for me to really be able to use because I'm only a beginner. So I wrote a large part of MDN called the Learn Web Development section, or the learning area as we sometimes call it, which contains a whole bunch of complete beginners tutorials on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc. Just to allow people to get from complete beginner no knowledge to comfortable enough to start using the rest of MDN.
Yeah, I think that the main value for the most of developers is not your actual documentation on web platform, but introductory articles. When you're completely new to something, there's always a group of CSS properties or JavaScript methods or some web platform API, and there's always introductory article explaining how this thing works. Like maybe not always, but there are so many of them. It's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree in some respects, but disagree in other respects. I think the MDN has got huge value in terms of its pure reference material. It started off as a site basically for established, or maybe you could say advanced developers or professionals.
Yeah.
And we did have, for each API, for example, we would make sure to write like a usage guide, like a basic, here's how to use the API, but
not just docs, but something in human words.
Yeah, but even those guides had a certain amount of assumptions in terms of what you knew. It'd be like, for example, this is a basic guide to teach you how to use service workers, if there is such thing. A basic service worker guide sounds a bit like an oxymoron to me, but there you go. But, it would still assume that you have good working knowledge of all of the basic APIs that came before that and the built-in JavaScript language. But with the learning area, it's much more of a kind of, we're assuming none of this, and we're making sure that you've got all of the steps that you need to get where you need to go in terms of your learning or your next step of your career.
So MDN started as a Mozilla Developer Network, as a place where you probably document all details regarding Gecko, Firefox, and all your engine-related stuff. But these days, it's full of information about the web platform itself. So more than just Firefox. You used to have a lot of, I guess you still have some information that's specific to Firefox, but you also have documentation on other browser-specific things. So at some point, maybe a couple of years ago, maybe earlier, a lot of companies decided to not to create their own documentation on their browser, and instead of contribute to MDN. And MDN basically became the web platform's Wikipedia in a way. Who was in charge of this decision? I mean, who came up with this idea to gather everyone together? Or it just happened naturally?
There's quite a few parts to this. I mean, in terms of MDN's absolute origins, it was originally the content, some of the content that you now see on MDN was actually part of Netscape DevEdge. So that's going way back.
Way back.
I think it was around 2004 that, if you remember, AOL bought Netscape, and they ended up shutting down.
That old.
They ended up shutting down Netscape DevEdge. But basically, I mean, I believe it was Mitchell Baker that went to them and basically campaigned to get the content that was on Netscape DevEdge rescued or released, and allow us to release it under a permissive license so that people could contribute to it and share it. So there was all kinds of incarnations between then and now. There's been at least 2 or 3, I think 3 different platforms that MDN has been built on in that time. And we've always had kind of some web platform documentation and some Firefox internals documentation. But yeah, a while ago, we kind of made the decision that it would make more sense to just have it purely focusing on web platform, just to make, the mission of it more obvious and the usage of it more obvious. So eventually we're aiming to move all of the kind of Firefox internals type stuff off to like another more suitable platform somewhere else, just to avoid that kind of confusion. But yeah, so, there was another effort going towards your talk about all of the other companies converging on MDN as the place to document things. There was another attempt a few years ago to do a similar site, which was this web platform docs thing that you may have heard of. I mean, I was actually one of the people that started that site for my sins. This was a couple of years before I was hired by Mozilla. But it was interesting. The idea was we did get some feedback from people saying, I'm not so sure about contributing to MDN because it seems like it is a bit Mozilla biased.
Because there's a Mozilla name.
Maybe.
The name.
Yep. Maybe. Who knows? Possibly. And you had loads of ads everywhere saying, just use Firefox. No. Joke. Do not take that part seriously. But yeah, so that particular project had very noble aims in terms of providing a real vendor-neutral source of information, but it failed because MDN already had such a massive head start, and the established passionate contributors in the MDN community did not want to move on to some new site. They just wanted to carry on contributing to MDN. So basically it failed. But fast forward a couple of years after that, maybe sort of about 2 years ago, perhaps. Yeah, it's about 2 years ago. We started talking to a bunch of the other companies in the web space about creating the MDN Product Advisory Board. So this is like, it's a coalition of people from different browser vendors. We have representatives from Google, from Microsoft, Mozilla, of course, Samsung Internet. We have someone from the W3C to kind of represent it from the standards kind of direction. And we also have someone from the Boku consultancy that are based in Boston.
I know this.
Very interesting company. They're kind of like a services consultancy that just does useful work that helps to advance the web in a good way, which is really nice. So yeah, we have all these companies together and we meet roughly every 6 months. We get together and just discuss kind of documentation issues of shared interest that we want to help improve. And it's really good. I mean, it's very effective. We now have a Google Tech writer who pretty much contributes to MDN full time, helping to document kind of, primarily the APIs that Google have as their highest priority interests. We have lots of people helping to improve the browser compat data resource that we have. So, not only having documentation on all of the web platform, but also having compat data for all of the web platform. And that's been a long ride, but I mean, it's basically feature complete now, the browser compat data. And we're now working on a project to just improve the quality of the data. So get rid of the kind of true values and null values, which basically means either, yes, we know the browser supports this, but we don't know what version, or we don't know if the browser supports this or not, and replacing that with actual proper browser versions, because that's the highest quality data that you can get. So we're trying to make sure that that's improved in quality.
There are many places where you can check the browser compatibility with certain features, like can I use database, for example, and Chrome Web Platform website and some others, we used to have such documentation on DevOpera. I guess it would be good to have some database under this advisory board to develop it together, because some web platform features appear on Can I Use, for example, like weeks later than they appear in browsers. So this process might be slow. But since you have a little bit more resources to deal with this, it's common interest to have this in one place. I guess MDN could be the actual place where you go to check the browser compatibility.
Yeah, I mean, my ideal thing was I'd like to see all of the different sites that publish compatibility data to maybe collaborate on contributing data to the same database rather than lots of different ones.
Yeah.
Because the data is published under a completely open license, so anyone could pick it up and just represent it, and it's very granular data, so that you could quite easily build different views, whether you want a really, really granular view or just like a very high level kind of view of the support data. So yeah, I mean, that it will obviously take a bit of time to get there, but I mean that would be my ideal for the future.
There's one developer from Moscow, Roman Dvornov. Have you heard about him?
Yeah, I've talked to Roman online. He used to contribute quite a lot to
MDN data.
The MDN data repo, which contains all of the CSS formal syntax and such things.
Because he's developer of this CSS parser called CSS tree. Like tree with branches, not 3 as a number. And he wanted to improve this data because there are many inconsistencies and some even mistakes in this data because it's huge. So he started to contribute to this project just because he needed this data, or just he wanted to improve his own project. So like Mozilla as a source of information coming up over and over again everywhere I go. It's good to have something like this live and supported by other companies rather than Mozilla. And how other companies or regular developers could actually contribute to MDN? Like how does it work? Basically, you have some editors inside of Mozilla, you have some people outside, which are probably editors as well. But for regular developers, what could they do to fix some bugs or write some documentation?
So this is literally the hardest question I ever get asked. There are literally so many things you could do to contribute to MDN. Most people that ask me this question at conferences, I tend to say, take my email address, email me afterwards, and I'll try and talk to you a bit to figure out kind of the best contribution for your skill set, kind of thing.
Let's run from the other side. Like, I found a mistake on MDN. What should I do apart from complaining on Twitter?
Well, complaining on Twitter will get you a long way, especially if you CC my Twitter handle on it. But I would try and advise everybody, if it's just kind of like a fairly simple mistake, maybe it's a typo, or maybe it's just like a really obvious simple code error or something, just sign up for an MDN account and just go and fix it yourself.
So it's easy as that.
It's we use GitHub authentication for login. So get yourself a GitHub account, go on MDN and link the MDN with your GitHub account, sign in, and then you can just
press edit button and
yep. There is a giant edit button that's very hard to miss at the top of pages, and you can press it and then go and change it yourself.
You should definitely make it red.
Well, we need to make it twice as big as well.
Or green, I don't know.
Red and italic. Maybe we should make it flash. Who knows?
And Comic Sans.
Absolutely. People would, we'd get like, maybe 2,000 BCD pull requests a year and then 50,000 pull requests with people trying to change the typography on the edit button. No, seriously, it's one of those things that's quite frustrating as MDN staff. You see people all the time report typos, and you kind of think, why are you just reporting this? It takes you longer to report it than it does to just fix the thing yourself. But I can kind of understand why people don't. I think there's this kind of, because MDN is, as you said, kind of like the Wikipedia of web technologies, and it's kind of got this authority to it. I think people kind of feel a bit scared and feel like they haven't got the power to contribute.
If you think about Wikipedia, there are so many people with their interest and opinions around Wikipedia. If you try to fix something or add something, you'll have to go through editing process. That's the easy step. Then you should go through like a reviewing process, and there are many people trying to argue with you. So it's like I tried many times, but most of the times I failed.
Okay.
So I guess it's much easier in MDN case because it's like web platform is not full of political opinions. It's just web platform thing.
Certainly less full of political opinions, I would say. Another thing that scares people is the fact that when you make a change, it's just instantly live on the site because it is a wiki. It's still a wiki, even though wikis are pretty old-fashioned these days. It may not look like a wiki, but it is, believe me. But once you make a change, we tend to get an email that reports it and says, so-and-so person has changed this page. And then it gives us a diff and we can just look and see what the change is and whether it looks okay. And, if you're someone that cares about the web and just wants to help, then you should just go ahead and make that change and not worry, because the worst thing that will happen is we will revert your change with like a polite message just to say, this is not quite right because of this, but thank you for your time kind of thing. I think that's the case for smaller changes. I think if it's a much larger change, it's like rather than just a typo, it might be, I want to add documentation to MDN for this massive web API or something. You should probably get in touch with us first and tell us your intentions, because there's a definite right way to do that and lots of wrong ways to do that. And we can help to guide you through, and we can offer to help review your articles and give you guidance on how to do these things successfully. The best place to do that is probably, we have an MDN discourse forum. So if you just search for MDN discourse, you'll find our discourse forum and send us a message on there and we may get back. And we also have a GitHub repo, which is github.com/mdn/sprints. And if you file issues there about documentation issues, we can also get back to you on there. So there's many ways to do it.
Is there documentation, how to write documentation on MDN?
There is, but there's kind of so much of it that I think if you started off by trying to do that, you'd just go crazy. I think
it's better to ask the actual people.
Yeah, it's probably better to ask the editors. If it's something like, another approach is, if you just want to add, say, a CSS property or an API page, actually, you need to ask for page creation permissions, first of all, because we don't give you page creation permissions by default just because of worry of random automated bots doing horrible things of adding loads of pages of spam to the site. We have had quite a few spam troubles in the past.
All right.
But you can ask us on those mechanisms and we can talk to you and see what you want to do and give you that. But after you've got that, if you want to add a page, say like a new CSS property or a new web API method or something, it's usually best to just go and find a page which is properly formatted and just copy the structure over and just change the text to relate to the new thing you're adding. That's probably the best way to do it. We do also have code guidelines and style guidelines and things, like we've put quite a lot of effort into it. But yeah, you know what it's like. As a developer, we hardly ever read the documentation first, do we? We just jump in and start breaking things. That's how we like to do it. So
that's true.
Yeah.
I know a few developers trying to help a Russian-speaking community by translating actual W3C specs. So they're taking some accessibility or like CSS or HTML specs. Well, not actual HTML because it's huge, but some smaller specs. And they translate it to Russian and they publish it and they think that it will make things easier for actual developers. But I strongly disagree, because once spec is translated, it stays the same. No one's gonna support this translation. No one's gonna bring some changes from the next version of the spec. No one's gonna, publish it officially on W3C side, probably. Sometimes it's like old documentation. It's better to have newer documentation in English rather than old documentation in Russian. So I usually suggest people translating actual articles instead of specs. And I saw something like this happening on MDN as well. I saw some introductory articles on some technologies or APIs translated to Russian, because I guess you have a translation mechanism on MDN, right?
Yes, we do.
Is there any value in translations?
So this is a really interesting point to bring up. I certainly agree with you that there's not much value in translating specs, because specs largely aren't written for developers anyway. In terms of MDN translations, we do have full-featured translation capabilities. So you have a languages submenu on every page, and you can go to that and either view the different translations, or you can click the Add New Translation button and you get kind of like a side-by-side diff thing where it shows you the original text and then it gives you an edit window where you can write in your translation.
Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. You even suggest translated version if I'm coming from Russia using like a Russian browser.
Right. Yeah,
I guess you do.
Yeah, we do. We use like the default language settings to suggest a translation if one exists for the particular page,
even if it's outdated, I guess.
Yes, this is here lies the problem.
Yeah.
So this is the ultimate problem with translations. We have a writers team of I would say. I was going to say 8 writers, but kind of 7.5. I don't really have time to do writing as much anymore. Now I'm a manager. Now I'm managing the team.
So you're a half writer, officially.
I'm officially half a person. But all of our time is taken up on doing the English version. And we don't have the language skills in the team to keep up with making sure all translations are kept updated. To actually have teams inside the company to deal with all translated versions would be pretty impractical. We'd need a similar sized team for all locales.
Yes, yeah.
And it wouldn't be feasible. So we rely on a lot of volunteer time to do translations. So the problem is that once you've done a translation, it will end up just standing still and becoming outdated. So what I would advise, actually, I think you've got a good point there, that you should settle on documenting just the most useful guides rather than trying to document the whole API docs and things like that. We also have a feature on MDN called watching, so you can watch single pages or entire trees of documentation.
Right. So if you did some translations, you can watch a page and see what changes you've been made and incorporate them into your translation.
Yeah. So if you've done a Russian translation on MDN, you could then watch the Russian version to see if anyone edits it.
Yeah.
You could also watch the English equivalent just to see what changes get made to the original, and then you can update the Russian version to suit. But this is the thing. If you're going to do a translation, I would suggest that you need to have a serious think about whether you might be able to put some time into maintaining it afterwards, because otherwise it will likely become out of date and fairly useless in 6 months or a year. It's a shame. Like I would love to have a better plan for localizations on MDN, but we have 90,000 pages all in all.
90,000.
And
wow.
It's just, it wouldn't be possible for us to translate all of it into all of the different locales that people care about. I think also it depends as well how many people in your particular locale have a good grasp of English. So, for example, in the Indian development community, pretty much every Indian web developer speaks English. So there's kind of no point translating it into Indian dialects. Same with Scandinavia. Pretty much everybody in Scandinavian countries tends to have a good grasp of English. So it's pointless. But in places like China and Japan, it's not quite so good.
Even Russia.
I was also going to say Russia doesn't quite have as good grasp of English in all places. So I would say that Russian is like a more useful locale to translate things into. I mean, the best maintained locales on MDN are probably Chinese, Japanese, and French. We have an awesome French contributor called Julien, or Sphinx as he's called online, and literally he spends a huge amount of his spare time keeping all of the French stuff up to date on MDN. He does an amazing job. So I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Sphinx, because you're amazing. If by in some chance you hear this podcast, thank you for all your work. But so it's a difficult problem. And I would say that you do need to, choose carefully the things that you choose to translate. Just keep it to the most important guide or tutorial articles. And yes, be prepared to spend a bit of time watching pages and maintaining them too afterwards.
But if at any point you decide that you want to gather some volunteer teams that might watch or help translating new pages or update old ones, I'll be glad to help, because there's a huge community listening to this podcast, a Russian-speaking community. So we can always try to help MDN update their translations.
Okay, great.
Just let me know.
Great stuff. Well, I very much appreciate the offer.
As for outdated articles, I think you might automate it somehow. I guess if article is old enough and the difference is it feels like it's big, you can probably mark it as outdated. Not suggested first, but suggest English version, even if locale is matched.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a good idea, having some kind of system like that. I mean, possibly even deleting stuff if it's just really, really bad. If it's got to the point where it's so outdated that it's considered harmful, kind of thing.
Yes.
It's probably a good idea to delete such things. To talk a little bit about future plans.
Yeah.
Eventually, I mean, it's very much an experimental phase right now, but we're eventually hoping to move most of the MDN content onto GitHub rather than being locked in the wiki database. So
you already have some demos hosted on GitHub. Some interactive built-in demos, I guess. So
yes, the interactive examples.
Yes. Yeah. So I tried to fix some things myself. So I edited it on actual wiki interface, and then edited some send pull requests on GitHub. GitHub. So it was two-step thing, but still manageable.
We're hoping to move it all to GitHub because we've had much more success with the GitHub contribution model in terms of inspiring contributors to take part. So, in terms of the number of people we have doing effective changes on the wiki, it's not too bad, but it's a bit kind of random and it could be better. Whereas, if you're using GitHub, you can say, okay, we want to concentrate on this problem next. And you can write issues that say, here's the next 10 or 50 or 100 things we want to achieve.
Then, to have some low-hanging fruit tasks for new developers.
And then people can just pick up those and take them as they want kind of thing. So that seems to have worked fairly well for us. We had a huge uptake of people helping with the interactive examples repo and the browser compact data repo, and it still carries on to this day. So it's really effective. There would be other advantages to this approach as well. If you have a load of content stuck in a wiki and you, for example, want to change the sidebar in 5,000 pages, if you haven't implemented that via a macro like we do for a lot of that stuff, then you'll find yourself having to manually edit 5,000 pages and it can just be painful sometimes. So to have it in a GitHub repo would mean that you'd just be able to write yourself a little Python script just to step through and change all of those.
And have everything not in Markdown, for example, which is much more, common these days than what's the Wikipedia format? What's the wiki something?
Oh, like Wikimedia format.
Yeah, Wikimedia. Yeah.
No, that's pretty painful to write.
Yes.
But yeah, Markdown is what we'd probably store the pros in. I think it would work very well. Like developers much prefer writing things in Markdown these days. There's all sorts of advantages. Like another advantage that got mentioned to me a couple of times during JSConf was like, it'd be fantastic to have the MDN repo just downloaded on your machine, and then you can go and edit things offline whilst you're on a plane or a train journey or something. That would also be a big bonus.
There are a few web apps and software that actually does that. So you can download MDN to your Inhabitant offline. So there are some applications doing that.
I did not know that. That's really interesting.
So I've been doing this for a while. So like when you're traveling somewhere on a plane or somewhere like offline, you can search through MDN. I guess it would be great if you could just implement service workers with offline support.
Oh yeah,
at some point.
We've already talked about that, and we've got that on the dev roadmap somewhere. Yeah, it would be a pretty simple fix as well, just to have like a general service worker that for every single page will offer you the chance to just store it offline. Yeah. It would be pretty quick to write, I think. So yeah,
open source in everything could actually, and putting some effort into creating issues and tasks for community, it could actually help you to move forward with MDN and everything. Because I know a lot of people that are willing to help, but they have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, good luck with that, because like 90,000 pages
It is. I mean, there's as I say, there's so many things you could do. You could just go around fixing typos, and quite a lot of people do that. They will maybe just fix 2 or 3 typos a month, and that will be their contribution to MDN, but that's still hugely useful. And then you get people that just want to write examples, but we haven't found a way that's really successfully provided easy lists of the most important stuff to do. So yeah, we're still kind of looking for that magic bullet really in that regard. And as I said, like GitHub Issues has really worked on the repos so far. So
GitHub, Markdown, and open source might help you a lot. So again, I'll be glad to provide support of Russian-speaking community. We have a lot of good people there.
Absolutely. Well, I know that already, but it will be wonderful to have you folks take part. I'm quite excited about this possibility, so thank you.
And thank you for being with us today.
And thank you for having me, Vadim. Pleasure.
You were listening to 178th special episode of Web Standard Podcast. Thank you for listening. See you next week in a regular Russian-speaking episode. Bye.